Hey, what's up, everybody? Hope you're having a great week so far. Heads up that I will not be doing a episode this week of the Friday wrap up on my channel. Me and my wife are getting out of town for a few days and just kind of getting off the grid. I've been working nonstop, even through the weekend, the last few weeks. So I just had projects back to back to back, and it's been good, but I need a break. So no show on my channel tomorrow. I want to do this quick video before we take off. So the big news right now in the boxing world, and you guys saw boxing Twitter kind of blow up last night, is that Canelo Alvarez is apparently very close to accepting a 2-fight deal with Eddie Hearn, Matchroom, DAZN, to fight Dmitry Bivol at 175 pounds, where he has held a title for several years now, and then a third fight with Gennady Golovkin at 168. So Canelo's undisputed super middleweight championship will be on the line there. Golovkin will be moving up. And both these guys would have to win their next fight. Of course, Golovkin's going to fight Ryoto Murata in Japan, and Canelo would have to beat Bivol for that third fight between the two of them, which most people would view as a rubber match to happen. So let me state before I go any further, none of this has been confirmed, okay? And the people, one in particular who dropped the story on this, has been dead wrong on several recent breaking, quote unquote, stories that they've put out there. So I want to preface and make sure that I make it very, very clear. None of this is official yet at the time I'm recording this. It is a rumor that this deal is very, very close. Okay, so I want to give some quick thoughts because I put up a poll. I was very, very surprised to see the reaction to this. I understand that some people are kind of over the Canelo Golovkin thing, and I feel that Golovkin has slipped. He's clearly past his best. He's nowhere near the prime he was around the time when he fought David Lemieux, or right around that time. I thought that was peak Golovkin. He's years past that, right? I get that. But the Canelo Bivol fight is pretty good, especially at 175 pounds. So I'm really surprised at the reaction I've seen on Twitter. There are a lot of people upset about this. And a lot of the same people that were kind of applauding the rumors, remember before he was going to fight Macaboo at 200 pounds. A lot of people were kind of cheering that because they looked at the weight difference. And I tried to explain to you guys the size difference between those two isn't that much between Canelo and Macaboo. But some of the same people that were really excited for that and applauding Canelo are now bashing the Canelo Bivol matchup. And I don't quite understand that. So I put a poll up on Twitter last night, and this poll will be up for a couple more days. Let me share my screen here. And I made this real short and simple and sweet because it just based upon the criticism that I've been seeing on Twitter. And I asked which fighter has done more in their career to quote unquote earn a fight with Canelo. I got Jermall Charlo up there, who currently campaigns at 160. Dmitry Bivol, who, of course, I mentioned earlier, David Benavidez, who campaigns at 168, and Demetrius Andrade, who campaigns at 60, but rumor has it will be dumping his belt to avoid his mandatory and moving up to 168 soon. So we've got over 3,000 votes so far. If you haven't voted on this, please do so. Please share this poll because I'm very interested at the results so far. Charlo and Bivol are the top two options so far, which they should be. I agree with that. They're far ahead of Benavidez and Andrade, but I'm surprised only about 40% of you have said Bivol, because to me, he has clearly done more than the other two guys. So, and I wanted to just talk about this, specifically Bivol and Charlo. Let's make the comparison. But before I go into that, I've noticed a couple different themes in a lot of the responses, okay? I haven't retweeted or liked any of the responses. I'm kind of leaving it open. I'm not going to respond to any of it. But I've noticed one big theme from a lot of people is, well, of the 4 fighters on this list, there's only one who is not a 2-time champion, because Charlo and Andrade have won titles at 54 and 60, and then Benavidez has won a title at 168 twice. And that really, really surprises me, because it's interesting to me, and this is very indicative of the way promoters have found a way to use these title belts to build up fighter resumes with smoke and mirrors and manipulate uneducated fans. And I'm not bashing casual fans, because we need casual fans. They're extremely important to the sport of boxing, particularly in the United States with the current business model we have. But title belts and things like that really can be used to manipulate audiences and sell them something that they're like, almost fool them into seeing something that really isn't there. If you look at who Charlo and especially Andrade and even Benavidez at 168, who they beat to win their title belts, and then the number of defenses and who they defended against, it's paper thin. Those titles are paper thin. Now, Bivol has only won one title, but if you look at some of his defenses and the guys he's beat, one win he has, probably his most dominant win over a top fighter. That guy right now holds a world title and is about to unify, probably unify. That's Joe Smith Jr. I'm talking about, probably unify with Artur Beterbiev later this year. So, I mean, there is no win on Charlo, Benavidez, or Andrade's resume that comes anywhere near Bivol's win over Joe Smith right now. There just isn't. So let me share. I want to show you guys these just compare resumes very, very briefly, because I think it's important that you see exactly what I'm talking about. Hang on one second. Come on, Mike. There we go. Boom. All right. So here's Bivol's resume. And I'm not going to go all the way down to the bottom. I want to just show you guys a particular run of fights. Now, I'll be very, very honest here. I mean, since the pandemic, Dmitry Bivol hasn't done shit. And I totally understand that. He hasn't fought in the United States. His opposition has been pretty weak. He hasn't done much in 2020, 2021. But when you look at 2018 to 2019, guys, look at this run. He fights Sullivan Barrera, who only had one loss at that point, was seen as a top contender. All right. And then he fights Isaac Chilemba, good fighter, not a great fighter, but a good veteran fighter, certainly up there with comparable to some of Charlo and Andrade's best wins for sure. Maybe a better win than any of Benavidez's wins. Then you have Jean Pascal, who I get it. He's juiced to the gills doing a ton of performance enhancing drugs, but based on some of his recent wins, that's a pretty good W for Bivol, especially at that point in his career. You guys got to remember, Bivol at this point in his career had like 15 some odd fights, and he's fighting this level of opponent. And then Joe Smith Jr., which I think, again, that's a really, really good win. And guys, if you look at the scorecards here, he barely lost a round in those 4 fights. So 2018 to 2019, that's a heck of a run from Dmitry Bivol. Truly, truly is. And he's only got 19 pro fights, which brings me to another point. Another theme that I'm seeing from some of the criticism is people are saying, well, look at the number of fights Charlo and Andrade have compared to Bivol. He's only got 19 fights. And again, I just think to myself, it's so easy to manipulate people now in the current boxing landscape, because it really doesn't matter how many fights you have. It's quality over quantity. But with a lot of casual fans, and again, not bashing them, it just is what it is. They will look at the number of fights and be like, well, this guy has 30 something fights. This guy has 30 something fights. This other dude only has 19. So these guys have a better resume. No, that's not true. That's not true. It's about who you have fought. Now, I just wanted to quickly scroll down and look at 154, Charlo did have a couple of good wins. Austin Trout was a good win. J. Rock Williams, that win aged pretty damn well. But at 160, dude, look at this guy's resume. His best win is clearly Sergey Derevyanchenko, right? And you could argue Matvey Korobov is a solid win. A lot of people thought he lost the Korobov fight. And if we click on Korobov's resume, he had only fought once in 2 years between 2016 and 2018. When he fought Charlo, he had only fought once, and that was against a journeyman in a 6-round fight. To put this into perspective, okay? So Korobov was a very, very inactive fighter when they fought, and a lot of people thought Korobov did enough to win. I thought I was good with Charlo winning that fight. I thought he narrowly edged it, but it was competitive. These scorecards were terrible. Larry Hazard's scorecard was disgusting in that fight. But either way, if you look at Korobov's resume, his last 4 fights, including the fight with Charlo, he is 0-3-1. He had a draw with a journeyman level opponent. Okay. So that puts into perspective the version of Korobov that Charlo beat. Now let's look at the Derevianchenko win, which was a good win, probably the best win of Charlo's career. Derevianchenko has lost 4 of his last 5 fights. Just to put things in perspective, he just lost to Carlos Adames. Nobody in their right mind would have picked Adames to beat Derevianchenko 5 years ago. Wouldn't happen, right? He just lost to him. So just to put things into perspective, and the fight with Golovkin, which was a year before his fight with Charlo, I think took a lot out of Derevianchenko. That was just a brutal war. Okay. And he has not been the same since then. Just does not look like the same guy. Another rhetoric, the third theme that I've seen from people, like the critics of this fight between Canelo and Bivol, is that, well, Charlo, first of all, he won titles at 2 weight classes. But again, I would argue Bivol's one title that is defended several times with his level of opposition is more substantial than both of Charlo's belts combined. The other thing is the number of fights, right? 32 fights versus 19. Well, Bivol's fought better opposition in his 19 fights, or at least as good of opposition as Charlo has fought, especially at 160 and above. Charlo's resume at 160 is pretty weak. And then the third thing is people talk about, well, Charlo as a brand because he fought on pay-per-view. Nobody knows who Bivol is. Guys, the Charlo doubleheader, which was back in late 2020, didn't even sell 100,000 pay-per-views. It was reported by the typical people that it did 100,000. That means it did about 80 something thousand pay-per-view buys. That was a stacked card with both Charlo brothers fighting in probably the best fight, the best opponent either one of them had faced, at least in the last 3-4 years. And it didn't even do 100,000 pay-per-view buys. So let's put it in perspective. Is that building a brand? Are the Charlos any more popular than globally, are they any more popular than Dmitry Bivol? I think the answer is no. Now, in the United States, yes, they are, of course. But both Charlo brothers can walk through the mall in most towns in America and nobody would know who the hell they are. Same thing with Dmitry Bivol. But if we're being honest, it's not as if these guys have been building this massive brand and they've been selling tons of pay-per-views. In fact, their doubleheader, their pay-per-view doubleheader did so poorly that their very next fights were on regular TV, I think Showtime. Could have been Fox. I can't remember off the top of my head. But just putting things in the perspective, okay? Now, all that being said, had Canelo decided to fight Charlo at 168, I would have welcomed that fight. I would have absolutely welcomed that fight. Had he decided to fight Benavidez at 168, I would have been cool with that too. I don't think Demetrius Andrade deserves the fight at all. I think he's being a hypocrite right now, avoiding his mandatory when he's bitched for years about being avoided himself. He's out of the discussion, in my opinion. But I would have been cool with Canelo versus either Charlo or Benavidez at 168. But I still view Canelo versus Bivol as a better fight, especially at 175, because he's not draining Bivol down at 168. He's going to fight Bivol at a full 175 pounds for a legit title that has been defended. It's not a vacant title that was won. I think he won. I think he actually did win a vacant title against a limited opponent. Because I think it was Trent Broadhurst. Let me double check real quick. Yes, it was Trent Broadhurst, but it wasn't a vacant title. But still, he won against a weak opponent. But the defenses against the guys I told you about, I think makes Bivol's title more substantial than any of those other guys' titles. So I'm good with Canelo versus Bivol. And here's the point about Gennady Golovkin real quick that I want to drop. If they do a third fight, and listen, I think Golovkin has a tough fight with Ryota Murata ahead of him. I think that's going to be a very, very tough fight. But if he beats Murata and Canelo beats Bivol, and we end up getting a third fight between Canelo and Golovkin later this year, I don't love that fight. I do think it's well past its due date. I completely understand. But from a business perspective, what I'm about to say is true, and it's going to trigger some of you. Gennady Golovkin has not fought in 2 years. He has not fought in 2 years, all right? He is still the biggest name in the middleweight division by far. He has the biggest name at 160 pounds by far, not even close. Golovkin's brand, the amount of money and global attention he brings when he fights, even though he hasn't fought in 2 years, is still bigger than Jermall Charlo and Demetrius Andrade's combined. Yeah, I said that. And yeah, I can back it up with actual numbers and statistics. That's the truth. He's actually a bigger brand than anybody at 168 or 160 through 175, not named Canelo Alvarez. That's the truth. So that's why that fight's going to happen. And I've been telling you guys for the last couple of years that they were going to eventually do that damn fight. It shouldn't come as a surprise. So all things considered, if Canelo fights and beats Bivol and then fights and beats Golovkin at 168, I think that's a good 2022 for him. It's still light years better and light years more than what any other fighter's doing in the sport right now. Name me a fighter doing anywhere near that level of opposition and business. Canelo's kind of carrying the sport right now. And I recognize that he's benefited from opportunistic matchmaking. I think his run at 168 is very overrated. I can pick it apart, okay? He's the new Floyd Mayweather in a lot of ways. I completely agree with all of that. But he's still carrying the sport right now. The only other guy, in my opinion, that would come close would be Alexander Usyk, is if he can beat Anthony Joshua when they have their rematch this spring. And then later this year, if he actually gets the fight against Tyson Fury, or if he fights another top heavyweight because he might have a mandatory fulfillment that he has to make. If he does that, then he's the only other guy that's kind of close. But right now, nobody else is doing anything on that level, guys. So, you know, game recognized game. You got to respect what Canelo Alvarez is doing right now. And I like the fight between Canelo and Dmitry Bivol. All right, rant over, guys. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next Monday on the Neutral Corner.